Picture this. You're walking through the crowded heart of ancient Rome in 67 AD. The heat shimmers off the marble streets, shopkeepers shout over one another to sell figs, olives, and wine, and the air smells of incense drifting from nearby temples. Then the noise fades. The crowd splits. Emperor Nero himself is walking across the forum, but it's the figure beside him that makes you stop cold. She's young, stunning, draped in layers of silk that catch the sunlight like liquid gold. Diamonds and emeralds rest against her skin, the kind of jewels only the most powerful man in the world can give. She smiles faintly, but her eyes tell another story. The Romans know the truth. This woman was once a boy named Sporus. What Nero did next would become one of the most unsettling acts of control and obsession ever recorded in history. The moment is frozen in the heat of the Roman afternoon. Merchants glance at each other without daring to speak too loudly. A pair of legionaries, stationed at the edge of the crowd, keep their eyes forward but can't help tilting their heads for a better look. Everyone knows, or thinks they know, the truth. Sporus. A name once meaningless to the streets of Rome, now spoken only in murmurs. How did a boy, barely old enough to shave, come to walk beside the emperor as his empress? The answer winds back through years of ambition, desire, and the slow corrosion of a ruler's mind. Rome in Nero's day was a city of extremes. Gleaming marble temples to Jupiter and Venus rose above cramped neighborhoods where families lived in single-room insulae, their walls blackened with smoke from cooking fires. The streets were alive with every language of the empire: Greek, Latin, Egyptian, Syrian, a constant hum of trade, gossip, and politics. And at its heart was the Forum, a place where a baker might brush past a senator, where deals were struck in whispers and rivalries kindled over cups of watered wine. From the balconies of the imperial palace, Nero could see it all. The city, the people, the power. And from the moment he took the throne at 16, he seemed determined to be not just a ruler, but a performer in the grand theater of Rome. In his first years, Nero was celebrated by the masses. He reduced taxes, distributed grain, and staged games so lavish they became the stuff of legend. He recited poetry in public, performed music on the kithara, and even raced chariots. For the common people, he was exciting, unpredictable, an emperor who entertained as much as he governed. But the Senate was less impressed. The old guard valued military discipline and political restraint, not a ruler who craved applause like an actor on stage. As years passed, whispers of disapproval turned into open hostility. Nero grew wary, suspicious. And then, amid the politics and paranoia, he met a woman who would change everything. Poppaea Sabina was a vision. Her hair, the color of ripened wheat, was arranged in elaborate coils, pinned with pearls from the Red Sea. She carried herself with the ease of someone who knew her beauty was a kind of currency, and she spent it wisely. At the time, Nero was married to Octavia, daughter of the late Emperor Claudius. Octavia was dutiful, modest, and politically safe. Poppaea was none of those things. She was witty, ambitious, and unafraid to speak her mind. Their affair began in whispers, but soon everyone knew. Nero's infatuation deepened into something dangerous. Octavia was cast aside, and in her place, Poppaea stood in a wedding so extravagant it drained coffers meant for public works. Yet her strength, the very quality that drew Nero to her, would be the seed of tragedy. Nero surrounded Poppaea with luxuries, silks from China, sapphires from India, perfumes from Arabia. But along with the gifts came restrictions. Guards shadowed her everywhere. Courtiers were warned not to linger in conversation with her. Every glance from another man fed Nero's jealousy. Still, Poppaea would not bend entirely to his will. She questioned his policies, laughed at his less-than-perfect performances, and advised him with the confidence of an equal. Most of the court tiptoed around the emperor's moods. Poppaea confronted them head-on. That independence could not last unpunished. The year was 65 AD. Poppaea was pregnant again, carrying what might have been Nero's heir. Accounts differ on what sparked the fight: a missed dinner, a careless remark about his music, or perhaps something deeper. But in a moment of rage, Nero struck her. The blow was fatal. Both she and the unborn child were gone within hours. What followed was not a quiet mourning, but a descent into delusion. Nero refused to cremate her body, instead embalming it and entombing her with honor surpassing any empress before her. He ordered the court to speak of her as though she still lived, her place at banquets left empty, her name invoked as if she might walk in at any moment. It was during this strange chapter that Nero noticed Sporus. A teenager, born into slavery within the palace, freed at a young age, and trained for clerical service. The resemblance to Poppaea was uncanny, the same curve of the jaw, the same large, expressive eyes. To Nero, it must have seemed as if fate had returned what death had stolen. There was one problem: Sporus was a boy. But for an emperor accustomed to bending reality to his will, that was hardly an obstacle. Nero ordered physicians to alter Sporus's body. Ancient surgery was risky and brutal, without modern anesthesia or sterile instruments. The procedure was dangerous, many did not survive such operations, but Sporus lived. From there, the transformation became total. Tailors fitted him with gowns designed to emphasize his new form. Jewelers repurposed Poppaea's own gems for him to wear. Hairdressers shaped his hair into towering styles, and tutors taught him the poise, voice, and mannerisms of an empress. Every morning, he woke in chambers decorated to echo those of the late Poppaea. Every reflection in the mirror reinforced the same truth: his own identity was being overwritten. In the spring of 67 AD, the palace was once again dressed for a wedding. Senators, generals, and foreign dignitaries gathered under gilded ceilings as musicians played the same hymns once sung for Poppaea. Nero took Sporus's hand and named him Sabina, after his lost wife. To the world, or at least, to the world that dared speak aloud, this was Rome's new empress. The fiction was complete. And for Sporus, there was no way back. For more than 2 years, Sporus lived the role flawlessly. He dined beside Nero, traveled with him to Greece, and greeted visiting kings and ambassadors. But the performance never ended. Every gesture, every word had to match the ghost he was forced to imitate. The wrong reaction to a memory Nero recounted, a memory that had never been his, could mean disaster. By 68 AD, Rome was in turmoil. Rebellions erupted across the provinces. The Senate declared Nero an enemy of the state. He fled the city with a small entourage, and Sporus went with him. When Nero chose death over capture, Sporus's life did not return to his own hands. In the chaos that followed, Sporus became the possession of whoever seized power. Nymphidius Sabinus, then Otho, then Vitellius, each kept him in the role of Empress Sabina, each for their own reasons. Vitellius's plans were the most cruel, to force Sporus into a staged public humiliation in the arena, reenacting a myth in front of thousands. Rather than endure that final degradation, Sporus chose to end his life. Poison was his escape. He was likely no more than 20 years old. In the end, the boy who had been turned into an empress died as himself, the one act of self-determination left to him. When Sporus's body was carried away, quietly, without the pomp of an imperial funeral, without even a public announcement, Rome barely paused. The same streets where he had once been paraded as empress went on as before, bakers kneading dough before dawn, merchants arranging bolts of cloth, senators debating in the curia. The city that had stared in fascination at his transformation now barely acknowledged his absence. It is here that the cruelty becomes clear. The spectacle had always mattered more than the person. Sporus's name entered history not as a celebrated citizen or a tragic hero, but as a footnote in accounts of Nero's reign, a symbol of decadence and imperial excess. Ancient historians like Suetonius and Cassius Dio wrote about him not to mourn him, but to illustrate the madness of emperors. His humanity, his voice, his feelings, his hopes, was lost in the way history recorded him. For centuries, he was remembered as an example, not as a man. The truth is, we know almost nothing about Sporus before Nero chose him. Was he ambitious? Did he have friends within the palace? Did he dream of a life outside the marble walls of Rome? No scroll, no inscription, no private letter has survived to tell us. What we do know is that once Nero's gaze fell upon him, those possibilities were erased. His life story became someone else's project, a script written by imperial desire. It's easy to focus solely on Nero's obsession, but the world around them allowed it to happen. Rome in the 1st century was a society built on layers of inequality. Slavery was common. The emperor's word was law. Even the highest-ranking senators could be exiled, or executed, for falling out of favor. In such a world, someone like Sporus, young, dependent on imperial protection, had no realistic way to refuse. The court watched, the Senate remained silent, and the public, though whispering, did nothing to intervene. It wasn't just Nero's will that trapped Sporus. It was an entire system that made resistance almost impossible. Imagine the mental strain of waking every day in rooms decorated to remind you of a dead woman you never knew, wearing her jewels, walking in her steps. Every conversation you have in public is an act, every gesture rehearsed to avoid suspicion or anger. For over 2 years, Sporus carried that weight. He became an actor in a role that demanded complete erasure of self. And yet, somehow, he performed it so well that he survived longer than many who crossed the emperor. Survival, in this case, was not triumph, but it was still survival. When Vitellius planned Sporus's final humiliation, the choice he faced was cruel in its clarity. Submit to the arena, and let thousands witness a degradation scripted for public amusement, or end his life on his own terms. In choosing poison, Sporus claimed something rare, the final say in his own fate. For years, others had decided what he would wear, how he would speak, even who he was allowed to be. His death was the one act no one else could direct. We often imagine resistance as loud, defiant, public. But sometimes, it is silent. Sometimes, it's a refusal so small that history almost misses it. For Sporus, resistance was in the choice to deny the spectacle one last time. It's a choice that would be easy to overlook, and yet, without it, his life's ending would have belonged entirely to others. Ancient Rome loved grand narratives, military victories, political betrayals, scandals that echoed through the Senate. Lives like Sporus's didn't fit the mold. The scribes recorded the oddity of the boy who became the empress, but rarely considered the cost to the person inside that story. For centuries, he was little more than a curiosity. Only in modern times have historians begun to ask, what did it mean to live as someone else's ghost? 2,000 years later, his story feels uncomfortably relevant. We live in a world that still reshapes identities, still values images over people, still allows the powerful to rewrite the lives of those beneath them. Sporus's life is not just an ancient tragedy, it's a warning that the forces that erased him are not gone. They have changed form, but the danger remains. Strip away the imperial marble, the jewels, the titles, and you have a teenager, caught in the orbit of the most powerful man in the world. He had no say in the role he was forced to play. He had no path back to the life he might have chosen. That's the tragedy, not just that he died young, but that the life he did live was never truly his. Picture the last morning of his life. Perhaps the light came in through a high, narrow window, catching the dust in the air. The sound of the city, carts on cobblestones, vendors calling out, drifted in from beyond the palace walls. He might have looked at the silks laid out for him, the jewels waiting to be worn, and understood they were not his. The world would remember him as the empress, but he would leave it as Sporus. Sporus's story survives not because Rome honored him, but because it served as a lesson about the dangers of unchecked power. Yet beneath that lesson lies a human truth: power, in its most destructive form, seeks not just to control, but to erase. By telling his story now, fully, without cutting away the uncomfortable parts, we restore a little of what was taken from him. In the end, Sporus's life forces us to ask, what does it mean to truly own your identity? How far can power reach into the self before there is nothing left? And perhaps most importantly, when history remembers you for the choices others made, how do you take back even a single moment that is yours alone?